Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome, introduce myself. I'm Rose Sarazoff. I'm a member of the board of CTA Metro New York, and as well as the chair of the Racial Justice Committee. I want to thank all of you for joining us, for all the moderators, all of our participants, for what is going to be a very important discussion on solitary confinement in the New York State prisons and the need for reform. In just a few minutes, I'm going to hand things over to Stanley Richards, our moderator, who will kick things off. But I want to do a few things about the webinar first. The panel will be an hour and 15 minutes. It is being recorded, so if you have to leave or get cut off, do not worry, you can catch up with it. Each of the panelists will speak for 10, 15 minutes, a brief period, and then there will be a discussion among them, and then we will take Q&A, hopefully the last 15 minutes, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Related to that, this is a webinar format, so don't panic. Your audio is turned off as well as your video, so your Zoom is fine. It's just the way we want to focus on the panelists and the discussion at hand. If you want to participate in the Q&A, please, at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A, add the question. All the panelists will be able to see the questions. At the end of the webinar, we will have a slide with the phone numbers and how to stay in touch with CTA Metro New York and information about how to support the cause, a little script for you when you call your legislators, and, you know, again, a copy of the recording. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, real briefly, about who CTA Metro New York is. We're a division of CTA National, which was founded in 1976 to promote a progressive agenda in the Catholic Church. We believe that as faithful Catholics, we're called to advocate for justice and equality in the church and in the world. We wholeheartedly affirm the ordination of women, the full inclusion of divorced and LGBTQ people, and we take Catholic social teachings very seriously. It's the foundational insistence that we work for the common good and demand that we speak out against climate injustice and the exploitation and abuse of the current state of capitalism, and actively work to dismantle and eliminate racist practices and structures in our society. We are clear that these are all Catholic issues and conversations, and we have a responsibility to use our voices to drive change. Obviously, we can't do this alone, so we create critical partnerships with sustainable coalitions and other groups, and center on the voices of the people that are mostly impacted. Now, our moderator today is Stanley Richards. Stanley Richards is the executive vice president of the Fortune Society, which is a service and advocacy nonprofit organization in New York, founded by David Rothenberg in 1967. The Fortune Society's mission is to support successful reentry from prison and promote alternatives to incarceration. Stanley is a formerly incarcerated man of color with decades of experience in the criminal justice field. In 2014, Stanley was recognized by the Obama administration as a champion of change for his commitment to helping individuals impacted by the justice system. He also became the first formerly incarcerated person to be appointed to the New York City Board of Corrections. As vice chair of the Board of Corrections, in June of 2020, Stanley was appointed to lead the working group to end punitive segregation. His other appointments include the Independent Commission on New York City Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, which released a blueprint for the future of criminal justice in New York City. The Working Group on Design, a subcommittee implementation task force to ensure effective implementation of a smaller, safer, fairer roadmap to closing the Rikers Island initiative and other criminal justice issues. We also have on our panel Victor Pate. Victor Pate is also a formerly incarcerated gentleman and has been engaged in numerous criminal justice reform campaigns as a volunteer since he had been released, such as Drop the Rock, Raise the Age, Domestic Violence, Parole, Release Aging People in Prison, as well as an active member and volunteer with the New York State Prison Justice Network, Challenging Incarceration, and the National Action Network New York City chapter, where he is a founding member of the Second Chance Committee. Victor's organizing and volunteer experience has allowed him to use these skills, and he is a paid organizer with the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement and was very successful in getting the HALT bill passed in the Assembly in 2018 and is extremely active right now. We also have on our panel Jerome Wright. Jerome Wright is our upstate Buffalo, Western New York organizer for the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement. He is also a returning citizen after spending 30 years in prison. Since his release, he has worked on Back to Basic outreach ministries with Youth Intervention Program, where he eventually became the program director, the Center for Employment Opportunities as site supervisor and life enrichment class facilitator, training, teaching, and supervising people on parole and probation on work assignments, providing mentoring, tutoring, and behavior modification training for at-youth risk in Buffalo and Rochester. At his church, the Elam Christian Fellowship, he was ordained a deacon in 2012 and continues to do community outreach and advocacy and serves as a facilitator for the Restorative Justice Committee. And our last panelist is Dr. Stuart Grassian. He is a board-certified psychiatrist who was on the teaching staff of Harvard Medical School for almost 30 years. He has extensive experience in evaluating the psychiatric effects of solitary confinement and has published and served as an expert in both individual and class action suits addressing this issue. His work has been cited in a number of federal court cases, including at least 3 times in the United States Supreme Court. Stanley, it's yours.
Thank you, Ro, for that introduction. And thank you to the organizers of this event and all of my fellow panelists. This is a moment in time in our life where we have an opportunity to right many, many wrongs. Wrongs that have started with incarceration and ended with mass incarceration, disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities. The increase in solitary confinement for predominantly Black and Brown people. What we've learned over the years is what doesn't work. And we know mass incarceration doesn't work to make communities safer. It doesn't work in terms of fairness of who goes in and who is accountable, who becomes accountable and who doesn't. And we also know that solitary confinement does not work. It does not make jail safer. It does not make prison safer. It does immense harm to the men and women who are subjected to solitary confinement. And we have a moment now where the shields of the blindness of this society and this nation have really been pulled back by what we've seen over the summer and what Black and Brown people have been living in their lives every day. And so today I hope we accomplish 3 things. One is begin to talk about the devastating harms and ineffectiveness of solitary confinement. 2, answer any questions that people have about why solitary confinement, why we need to end, why we all need to lock arms and take action. Those questions get answered. And then three, we leave here motivated more than ever to continue to battle mass incarceration and the elimination of solitary confinement. It is going to take a village to change these harmful policies that have been enacted for centuries where people are being harmed. And so I'm excited to be moderating this panel. We have an amazing group uh, of men who are going to share their experience and talk about solitary confinement and call all of us to action. I can tell you, as the chair of the working group, we're working in New York City to end solitary confinement. It has been a long slog for all of us, way too long for some. The advocates have been pushing us, and I would continue to ask you to continue to push us, push this city, push the Board of Correction, push us all, the Department of Correction, to end solitary confinement. I can tell you we are close. We are really close to being able to produce something for the public to give feedback and to begin to implement the recommendations, both of the work group and the refinement that the Board of Corrections has done. I'm going to be so proud when we eliminate solitary confinement in New York City. And my grandson and great grandsons, and we reduce the footprint of mass incarceration, where my grandson and my great grandsons will be able to look and think about their future, not in terms of the trajectory that I had to go through, juvenile justice, the adult criminal justice system. I want them to be able to live in a world where their prospects for their life is about college, it's about a healthy, sustained life for themselves and their families. And as we work together to end mass incarceration and eliminate punitive segregation, all of our children and grandchildren and generations of our family won't have to be subjected to the harmful effects of mass incarceration and solitary confinement. So it is my honor to turn to one of my brothers, someone who I admire, because the fight never ends with this brother. He's always in it. He's always out there to educate. He's always out there to support. And he's always out there to change the harmful effects of mass incarceration and punitive segregation. Victor Pate.
Thank you so much, Stanley. Thank you for having me on this important panel and allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Um, and I'd like to say, as I begin my, my points of discussion is that, we all were born and were given rights that are supposed to be humane and civil. And with that said, where it relates to, our fellow human beings and how we treat our fellow human beings, a reflection of how we are as a society. And when we talk about our fellow human beings that have the unfortunateness to experience being incarcerated in our prisons, in our jails, we also have a human right to treat people fair and humane and just, regardless of what their current or past circumstances, position, and life may be. And with that said, I'd like to point out two things that always comes up for me when I'm talking or addressing this particular issue when we're talking about solitary confinement in prisons and jails. One is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the other one is the UN standards for the minimum rules of treatment for people in prisons and jails. In both of these particular documents, they speak about humane treatment and inhumane treatment. And more specifically, it speaks to how people are still people, no matter where they may be, no matter what circumstances may be under. They are still people, and they deserve to be treated humane. And both of these documents speak to this. My particular point of address is on solitary confinement. And I will point your direction and information to the UN General Standards Minimum Rules of the Treatment of People in Prisons and Jails, which is now known as the Mandela Rule, which in 2015, the UN came out with a resolution that said no one should be held in any long-term solitary confinement. No one should be held in isolation past 15 days. And if people are being held in these conditions outside of these particular uh, treatment that people are supposed to have, then it is considered torture. So guess what? We are torturing our fellow human beings in our prisons and jails by allowing any form of solitary or isolated punitive segregation to continue to exist in our prisons and jails on our watch. If we're saying on one hand that no one should be treated this way, and then on the other hand, we are treating people this way, that means we are in violation in people's human rights. We are in violation of treating people with the dignity with which they are deserved. We are in violation of what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, that nobody should be treated inhumanely and nobody should be held in any long-term solitary confinement. And it's continuing to go on. And when we talk about, corrections, just that word in itself is a misnomer, because I don't see any incorrections when you continue to abuse and torture people, and you expect these very same people that are being tortured and abused while they're in confinement to come out to become better, reformed people, and you're not providing the premise or the programs or the ways by which these people can come out better, then why use the word correction? I think it's a misnomer, and I think it's a disservice to human beings globally. And I think it's a disservice more so to those people that are being held on these torturous conditions. If you place a person in a situation where you are totally isolating them from any type of human stimuli, or even giving them an opportunity to interact with other human beings, how is this supposed to be able to address and correct anybody's behavior? I don't see that being a reality. I just think that it's just not possible. Just for my small period of time, that I was in solitary confinement over a period of time, and what happened to me and what I seen happen to others should not happen to any other human being under any circumstances for any given reason whatsoever. Hence, solitary confinement is torture. It serves no purpose whatsoever to address people's behavior. It does nothing for safety and the security of a facility, and it does nothing for the general population in itself, but add to people's anger and frustration. And if you say that you want to help people to become better and you want people to become rehabilitative, then you have to treat people like human beings in order for a person to be able to come out better, in order for them to become contributing persons within our society. And you have to do this with sincerity, and you have to have the programs in place that will allow this transformation process to even happen. Well, this is what solitary confinement bill is proposing. This is what we've been advocating for the last 8 years. And as mentioned, we were successful in 2018 in getting this bill passed in the Assembly. 8 years is 8 years too long for these people to do the right thing. For people to be able to address whatever disciplinary issues that they may have, for people to be able to come out as better human beings, then halt solitary confinement bill is the bill that will allow this to happen, because we are proposing alternatives, programmatic, therapeutic, and rehabilitative alternatives to people being separated from general population. And we're saying that nobody should be held in long-term solitary confinement past 15 days. And if a person needs to be separated from population for any given reason, then it should be done humanely. And it should be done for the explicit purpose of helping people to become better, not people to become worse. Because people go in solitary oftentimes come out a lot worse than they were before they went in. We also have specific prescriptions to this particular bill that will restrict people that are considered in special populations from being held in any solitary confinement whatsoever. People who have mental health, people who are physically disabled, women that are pregnant, people that are LGBTQ, and juveniles. No one that are in these particular categories, what we consider special population, should be held in any solitary confinement because it only exacerbates their already existing conditions that they have, whether it be physical or whether it be psychological. Because you don't expect people to go in that have a mental health issue and don't receive any type of treatment or therapy or anything to address their mental health issue and expect them to come out and all of a sudden presto change them, they're going to be better people. It just doesn't happen. It's impossible. And it's not a real thing to even think that could happen without these particular programs, therapeutic and rehabilitative and transformative service, which is what the whole bill is based upon.
Yes.
And the whole bill is based upon the Declaration of Human Rights that says nobody should be held in long-term solitary confinement. There's a lot of different components to the particular bill, and I'm not going to go on because I'll relinquish our time to let my other panelists speak. But I just want you to think about some of the things that I just said and also think about what you're going to hear from the other panelists. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor. Our next panelist is Jerome. And I got to tell you, when I see brothers come home after 30 years long, and they come home not with a hardened heart, not with an angry heart, but come home with a servant's heart, as Jerome has done, I just lift him up to my Lord and Savior, because I know that the heart that he came home with was a heart that was given to him by a higher power. Because after that length of time in prison, it is so easy, as Victor just said, it is so easy to come home with a heart that is so hardened. Because I always say, hurt people, right? You gotta lead with love if you want love in return. Because hurt people, and this brother Jerome has come home, and he has come home with love in his heart, and he has come home with a servant's heart. So, brother Jerome, talk to us, man.
Thank you, brother. And I really appreciate that introduction, and I thank you. And like you said, to God be the glory. But I want to lift up the fact that I am one of thousands of brothers, many of whom are still in there, and this is what gives me the ability to fight. I mean, God sustains me, but knowing that I left brothers like Paul Clark and David Gilbert and too many others to name, who helped me be able to be who I am today. That's why we continue this fight. So I want to start that off by saying that. And thank you, brother, for being an example for all of us, that no matter what our past may be, if we change our heart, we change our mind, we can change our entire universe like you have done, and being, the vice executive director, a position that not too long ago none of us could have aspired to. And you broke that glass ceiling, and because of the wonderful job you're doing, somebody else that looks like you and I can step into that role when you're ready to go on to bigger, better things or to greener pastures. So thank you. And I will be remiss, man, in this time in our nation, this panel is heavy laden with testosterone. And I'll be remiss in not mentioning women, man, because women oftentimes get lost in this. And there's so many women that are in this campaign with us who tell their stories, heart-wrenching stories that I could never speak about solitary confinement without reminding people that we put our women and children in there, and that we put pregnant women in there, we put women with postpartum depression in there, we put women in there who we know already suffering emotionally because they're nurturers and they can't do anything in that in existence. And I want to hold the women because we wouldn't be here but for women. I was raised and I am loved by great women, wife and mother and family. So I just want to say we didn't forget the women, man, and women are very integral to this. And the sad thing is that they put more women in prison now than they ever have, and more of them in solitary, and of course, more of them look disproportionately like Stanley, myself, and Victor. So, women, keep your head up, man. We fighting for you. We didn't forget you. You right in our thoughts, and you right beside us. So I just wanted to say that. Ro representing on here for you. I just want you to know, I want to get that out the way. Ro ain't forget about you. And thank you, Metro, for hosting this and giving us the opportunity to speak to the people, because a lot of people really can't understand what's going on. But let me put it in these terms. First, Stanley said something earlier about we getting close. I like that we getting close, because I remember when we were so far away, it was just a vision. That was 8 years ago, and they told us it was impossible. But I'm telling you, like Victor just said, 8 is enough. Just like the show from the 60s, 80s, whatever that was, 8 is enough, man. We paid our dues. We've done everything you've asked us to do. We got majorities in both houses. We made adjustments and compromises in our bills to suit everybody's nuanced position. It's no more excuses. We found a way you can save money and save lives. Halt is not a problem to docs, to the governor, to the legislator. Halt is an attempt at an answer and a resolution to the problem. And the problem is we recognize that you have to have discipline. There's discipline in my own home, in my church, in my job. We recognize that. But how you discipline is what we're talking about. And this solitary confinement form of discipline in all its forms, keep lock, add, seg, you name it, is wrong. It is counterproductive, and it is detrimental to the growth and development of the people who suffer under it, and the well-being and safety of the people in facilities, and those who will invariably return to society. We're talking over 90% of the people. I spent 7.5 years in solitary confinement, and I call myself a survivor because I did not die there. That's the only reason why I say that, because I am forever scarred, traumatized. My life will never be the same, and nobody. And let me make this short. Let me say this: incarcerated lives matter too. They are your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, they are your family. They are part of our community. If they made a mistake, and by God, let's look at what's going on now. From all the reversals and exonerations that's going on now, everybody in there ain't did what they said they did. But I ain't even gonna begrudge that. Whether they in there because they did something or not, the minute we lose our humanity and treating each other as humans, then we're no longer human at all. And this is great man's greatest inhumanity to man. I can sit here and wax all day about the nuances in the bill. I don't want to do that. If you have a question, put it in the chat or ask it. What I will tell you is this is an abomination, and it's got to stop, and it's got to stop now. Why? Because listen, we in COVID-19 now. Some of you have had the experience of social distancing, of isolating, of quarantining, and it almost drove you crazy. Still, you had the amenities of your own home: cable TV, family, refrigerators with food, movement, the amenities that they don't have in solitary confinement. And you were going crazy, so much crazy that you were willing to threaten your life and the life of your family to get out to be around other human beings. But you only got a scintilla, an iota, exponentially multiplied the terror, the loneliness, the despair, the desperation that you felt on medical quarantine in a 6x9 cell with nothing but a bed and a toilet sink combination for 23 to 24 hours a day. 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 That's what we're talking about. Nobody should be relegated to that. First of all, nobody, this is the rules I'm telling you. Nobody is sent to solitary confinement for the commission of their crime. So however heinous somebody's crime is, that doesn't get them in solitary confinement. So you may say, oh, this guy killed how many people, he deserved it. He ain't going to get it if that's not the reason. The reason is an administrative decision by by the same people who have the authority over you to use it in varying ways. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like all correction officers is bad, because if they was, I wouldn't be talking to you now, because I would have never made it out of there. But the few bad apples seem to find their way to solitary confinement because that's where they can get their jollies off without, with impunity, without accountability, and in the silence that place provides for them, where nobody can see what's going on. We're talking about lives, man. We have young people dying and killing themselves in solitary. We got people committing self-mutilation just so that a human face can show up in front of their cell and minister to them, so that they can be taken out of cell to the doctor, bleeding and hurting, just so they can feel human again. If I played for you the soundtrack, which I hope before we leave you will allow me, of what a unit in solitary confinement, to debunk this myth of this nirvana place where you can sit and go, no, it is a cacophonous sound of discordant noise all day, all night, screaming, yelling, banging, sighing, crying, exerting their place in humanity as I am here, I am somebody, recognize me, because otherwise they have been eviscerated as a human being. Listen, encoded in our very DNA, what makes us human is the ability, the desire, the need, and the want to interact with each other. The greatest punishment you can give a man, woman, or child is to ignore them or ostracize them. And solitary confinement does both. That is torture. You might as well be waterboarding them, pulling their fingernails out with pliers. You might as well be hanging them upside down, whipping. It is the modern day whipping post, and we don't need it anymore. We can treat, listen, if you treat somebody like an animal, what do you expect that they will be? See, the sad thing is that you want to make it about personal accountability, but you treat them like an animal. You give them no therapy, you give them no education, you give them no job skills, no transitional services, no mental health treatment or therapy, no religious services. You give them nothing, and then you expect them to come out of that situation and comport themselves like John Q. Citizen. No, what you did is you did what COVID did. You a virus that replicates the ugliness, because you go in bitter and you come out not better. You come out worse. And we know this. See, this is indisputable. The doctor is going to get on. They're going to tell you about the indelible impact that it has on you, that they've known for eons. It was pretty much outlawed when people that didn't look like you and I were going to jail predominantly. And that's not a racist statement. That's just a statement of fact. Now it becomes commonplace when almost 60% of the people in there are black and brown and Latinx. We 13% in the state of New York, almost 50% in prison, and 60% in solitary confinement. And then you talk about mental health. We didn't criminalize mental health. A guy picks up a butt in the yard and he goes to the box for acting funny. You put him in solitary for that? Please don't let me get started. Listen to me. Halt got to get past, because you know what Halt tells me? All these progressives that are saying that's what they're about, it tells me that you're really progressive. Because if you can't bring Halt to a vote and pass that, then all our other efforts at reform and change are severely compromised. Because if you won't take a man out of a cell, if you won't first stop breaking international law, the Mandela rules, by the way, and then if you won't take a man out of his cell and stop torturing him, How can we believe that you're on the track to end mass incarceration by getting them from that same cell back into society? It's just incongruous to me. So if you want to prove to us that the times have changed, then get rid of the worst abomination before we start picking at those other things. And the worst thing we could do is take already broken people and shatter them in solitary confinement. Let's make broken people whole by when they do act up, getting them some help. You telling me the people that you've designed as being the most problematic, that need the most help, that you give nothing to, and that's all right. In the United States of America, that's all right. I'm ready to talk about the bill. I don't want to go no further. I think I said enough for you to understand the gravity of this situation. We got people like Leilene Polanco who died in solitary from an epileptic seizure that everybody can live from. Unnecessary. We got Dante Taylor was beaten so badly that to stop the pain and because he was in solitary and couldn't reach out to his family, took his own life. Got people like Ben Van Zant, 21 years old, had mental health issues, put in solitary confinement for complaining about abuses in the facility and killed himself. This is what we're talking about. Real people, not numbers, real lives, real families, real community members. Let's end it now. We can do it. There's no reason why. I'm ready to answer your question.
Thank you, Jerome. One of the viewers said, absolutely truth today. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Grassian, bring into this conversation, Jerome just described in great detail the harm and the reality of punitive SEG, solitary confinement. Talk to us, Dr. Grassian.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to do so. Jerome had some words around him: disoriented, ashamed, suicidal, withdrawn. Those are some of the things I was going to talk about. The chance of a person committing suicide in a prison, 7 times greater if you're in solitary confinement. They say that you need solitary confinement to make prisons safer. Prison systems that have reduced the use of solitary or almost eliminated it have had no increase in violence and problems in prison, and very often have had major decreases. You put people in solitary confinement and 95% of them are going to get out anyway, someday back to the community. If you put them in solitary confinement, the chance of them recidivating is greater. The chance of violent recidivism is greater. This has all been studied. This is all we've established this through research. When he talks about people being, or his writing there, disoriented, you're in a situation where you have so little in the way of environmental stimulation that people go into a kind of fog. They go into basically a form of delirium where they are confused, they can't remember, they can't think, and they can't focus at all. But if they do focus, they start focusing and they can't stop focusing. And they start focusing on something really unpleasant. The food came cold and they get enraged at it. They can't stop thinking about it. Or they got a little feeling in their stomach. And over time, it becomes cancer and they can't stop thinking about that. So, the person's ability to pay attention is impaired. And then when they do pay attention, it's to something awful and they can't stop paying attention to it. They can't shift. This business about being withdrawn, it's one of the most tragic parts of being in solitary confinement. Over time, the very absence of stimulation makes people incapable of tolerating stimulation. And this becomes an enormous impairment when they finally get out into general population or out into the community, after they're released from prison. People who were gregarious, who were friendly, become loners. They can't be with other people. Any kind of stimulation is too much for them to bear. And they isolate themselves. They can't stand noise. They can't stand anything around them. The tragedy of someone, I remember one person in particular, I was having dinner with his family. He'd go back to his room. He would just wait till they left the kitchen. He'd grab a plate of food and bring it back into this little room. He'd be back in solitary. He couldn't stand being part of the world anymore. These are some of the things that happened. And I mean, obviously there's so much I could say about the effects of solitary confinement, but one of the things I want you to know is that the toxic effects of solitary confinement have been well known for well over 100 years, over 150 years. And so I just want to leave you with one case. In 1890, the United States Supreme Court, this is how far back it goes that we knew solitary confinement was toxic. The case of In re Medley. Mr. Medley was a fellow in Colorado who had murdered his wife. He was duly tried, convicted, sentenced to death, death on the gallows, death by hanging. But in the interim between the time he committed the crime and the time that of the trial, there was a change in the law in Colorado. Under the old law, he would have remained where he was in the county jail for 30 days after sentencing, and then he'd be hung by the neck until dead. Under the new law, all condemned men in Colorado would be moved to the new Colorado State Prison, where they would be housed for anywhere from 0 to 45 days, and then hung by the neck until dead. The only difference was they'd be in solitary confinement for 0 to 45 days. Mr. Medley's attorneys said, you cannot impose this new sentence on him, this new law, because the addition of 0 to 45 days of solitary confinement, when added to a sentence of death on the gallows, is such an egregious additional punishment that it's ex post facto. You can't do that to him. That's what they argued. And they also pointed out, and by the way, you can't sentence them under the old law because you rescinded it when you passed the new one. The United States Supreme Court looked at this and they acknowledged, yes, people go into solitary confinement, end up psychotic, end up suicidal, and those who withstand the ordeal better rarely are capable of functioning fully in the community when they leave. The order of the court was to the warden of the Colorado State Prison to escort Mr. Medley to the gates and let him go free. Mr. Medley got away with murder because of the addition of 0 to 45 days of solitary confinement when added to a sentence of death on the gallows. And as I always say, we have come a long way downhill from there. I mean, that is almost facts. I could tell you more. You know, it's not like we don't know it today. I was going to quote you from Justice Kennedy, the United States Supreme Court, if you're familiar with what he said. The human toll wrought by extended terms of isolation long has been understood and questioned by writers and commentators. He was referring to the same Medley case I just talked about. 125 years ago, this court recognized that even for prisoners sentenced to death, solitary confinement bears a further terror and peculiar mark of infamy. A considerable number of the prisoners fell after even a short solitary confinement into a semi-fatuous condition, basically a delirium, and others became violently insane. Others still committed suicide. Thus, when sentencing a defendant, there is no accepted mechanism for a judge to take into account whether the time in prison will or should be served in solitary. So in many cases, it is as if a judge had no choice but to say, in imposing this sentence, the court is well aware that the penal system has a solitary confinement regimen that will bring you to the edge of madness, perhaps to madness itself. That was just a few years ago.
Powerful. I think what all of our panelists have expressed is the deep harm that solitary confinement lays upon the people who are experiencing it. But what I'd like to do, I have some questions, but I'd like to just ground the experience. And this is to Jerome or Victor. Can you describe for the listeners, what's the experience of solitary confinement? Can you walk us through what like a week would look like in solitary confinement, and why that experience creates the trauma that you talked about, Jerome?
Victor, can I jump in? Because I
Right
just
ahead, buddy. Go ahead.
because I just talked about this yesterday. Because I'm so glad you asked that. And I want everybody to know that we didn't rehearse this. This is live. But the one thing that never gets talked about when we talked about solitary confinement is getting there, the process. And that is the most traumatizing. It is the most deadly. So if you survive just getting there, let me tell you, when you go to solitary, for whatever reason they bringing you there, they have to come and pick you up, and they bring you with several officers and a sergeant or higher rank. They cuff you behind your back, and they have their sticks at ready, grinding them, and they're threatening you. They're saying all manner of things to you. One, really hoping you would do something, but basically letting you know that your next move could possibly be your last. And they will push you around, and they will trip you, and they will tighten the cuff so much that your fingers throb. My ring had to be cut off one year, my finger, my wedding band, because my fingers had been so swollen from the cuffs that the only way to get off was to cut it. So they take you into this room, into the solitary confinement union. You already hear the banging and the screaming, but right there, they surround you. More officers come out, and then they wanted to strip search you. Now they make you take off everything slowly, but you got to do it in every way that they say, with your nose on the wall, your hands up, your feet spread, and you got to hand back each article of clothing. And if it looks like you're about to move, they're taking you down, and they're taking you out hard and fast. And even if you comply, you're sweating, you're scared, you're cold, you're naked for no reason. This all is to traumatize and let you know we are in control. Your life is in our hands. Nobody can see, hear, or do anything. You can call for your mama like George Floyd did. You can call for Jesus. But you belong to us. And it is the most humbling, harrowing, dangerous time in your incarceration. And not only that, after they strip search you, they got to read you the riot act, what you can and cannot do, how you better and better not act. Don't give them no side looks. Don't make no side remarks. You are actually treated like you are somebody's child, and you better listen. And this is before you ever step into a 6x9 cell. This is on the way there. Then they give you whatever they want to give you to wear. I don't care if it's too tight, too small, too big, too dirty looking. You're either gonna wear it or not. And you're gonna wear it because whatever they give you, you're gonna put on, or they're gonna put it on you. And then, if there has nothing been no drama up to that point, physical, you may be escorted to your cell without further issue. But have you been beaten up, then you won't be escorted right away. You won't get medical attention right away. I've been assaulted for doing nothing, for being alleged to have done something. I've watched brothers be assaulted. I've watched brothers be killed. So just before you even get to the cell, and I'll let Victor tell you about after you step over that threshold, but it's entering the terror dome just to go into the unit, to be taken in there, only to be let out 24 hours later if you're not guilty or there's something else happens. But you got to go through the process. And everybody who goes through the process. Now, of course, if you look like me, you go through it probably you're going through it more frequently, and you're going through it a little bit more death-defyingly, if that's even a word, but you're going through it.
Thank you, Jerome. Victor?
Yes, I'll share a little bit there. So thank you, Jerome, for that. And I guess for me, this is one of the parts that I actually dread when on these type of discussions, because trauma and collateral damage is definitely real for those of us who have been there and done that. And it never goes away. You learn to cope and you learn to deal. And part of healing is talking about it. You know what I'm saying? And for me, this is part of the healing process. But I always tread this here because I'm transformed to that space and place and time. So your question, Stanley, was kind of sort of like walk people through what a week like. A week is like a year, or even a couple of years, if you ask me. And Jerome gave some descriptiveness in terms of what you go through, like before you even get in the cell per se. So, you know, you go to this unit, and each prison has this different constructural segregation unit, et cetera, et cetera. Some are cells, and with the bars, and some are just like closed steel doors with the little windows and stuff like you see in a lot of these movies, with the little slots for your food and stuff like that there. And surely you hear banging and screaming and hollering and people calling for help and calling for whoever else they can get the attention of, correctional officers who's assigned to the unit for whatever their issues might be. And so, so you walk into your cell and it's like 6x9 or whatever the measurements are. I don't even know. I've heard it 6x9. I don't know what it is, but I just know it's almost like the size of a closet, and a lot of people have heard this, or either a parking space and a window. You don't know what time of day it is. Lights stay on 24/7. Lights never go out. Never. And you're in the cell, and you got the little amenities and the toilet and the sink and the bed and stuff like that there. And you got space to walk back and forth from each side of the wall for the front or to the back. Like I say, depending on the construction of the cell, it could be bars, it could be a steel door with a slot and a little small window. And then you really sit down and realize, that right on time, right on time. This is the sound that you hear, and this is real. And then when you're here in this cell, you're sitting back and you're looking at every inch of the cell, every corner of the cell, everything that you can possibly see in the cell. You kind of sort of like take into scope of where you really are. And I know for me, there's not too many things that scared me. Even when I was doing what I was doing in the street, because I risked my life and I was in some very dangerous circumstances. Nothing scared me more than being in solitary confinement in a cell by myself, knowing that I was at the total mercy, like Jerome described, at the correctional officers that were responsible for that particular unit. Hallucination, voices, it don't take that long for none of that stuff to kick in. Not long at all. I mean, I think it started for me like within 3 days, you know. And it's a reality that you deal with, that you know. Some people never ever come back from the voices. Some people never ever come back from the hallucinations. And it goes on, and the collateral damages. And I can tell you that for myself, part of my survival that allowed me to basically come out in some form of with some form of fortitude is that I created an alternative reality, if you will, that I would pretend or think myself outside of my cell, outside of the prison walls, somewhere in a park, somewhere near some water, you know what I'm saying? Because I love water and I love the outdoors. So I would always imagine myself outside of my cell in the park with some water, having conversations with people that I knew were not there. But that was my way of coping and trying to deal with the reality of not losing my mind or not losing myself. That was my way of trying to hold on to some semblance of reality. Now just imagine, everybody doesn't have the ability to do that. Everybody is not able to create an alternative world for themselves that they really know don't exist and be able to I guess you can say, go back and forth between both worlds, knowing that you're really still in your cell, knowing that this person that you're having this conversation with doesn't even exist, is not even really there. But you have to develop some sense of coping skills in order to hold on to some sense of reality. Talking about 23 to 24 hours a day, guess what? That's very real. 24 hours plus, because sometimes you don't even come out of your cell. Depending on what correctional officer is on duty, you may or may not get out that 1 hour, that shower, that rec, or whatever the case may be. You may not even get your meal that day, depending on what officer is on and whether or not he likes or don't like you, or whether or not in his mind you were a pain in his behind and you made his shift harder because you asked for things that were only humane that you should have gotten and you should have a right to, and because he didn't want to give it to you. And guess what? Each shift that comes on, they pass it on. Listen, uh, Jerome down in his cell, man, guy was a pain in the brain, man. He kept asking for, man, forget him. Go by his cell. You know what I'm saying? He's not coming out for rec. Don't worry about rec for him. Just pass him. Oh, Victor, no. And Lord, just think, when you see an abuse happening to somebody and you speak out against it, guess what? Guess who's next? You.
Yep.
Because of the fact that you spoke about or even addressed the fact that you it's not right what you're doing to somebody else. Guess what? You next. Oh, I got beat up. I definitely got beat up. I'm a little guy. So
Yeah.
these are just some of the things that, like I say, that happen to people, and,
So,
and
a
this is the
question to
inhumanity.
yeah. So a question to open to everybody. A couple of questions that are coming up. One is, what impact does that have on the community when people spend long time in solitary confinement and then get released to the community? What impact does that have on the community? That's question one. And then question two is, what should we be doing that's different? Like, how do we, why the 15 days as the UN calls? Why the 15 days? Why do it at all?
So question one was what?
Question one is, what's the impact of long-term solitary confinement
Okay.
and when they get released to the community?
Well, first of all, I don't let me speak for everybody who's been in there long term, and I have been in there long term. Like I said, 7.5 years I spent in solitary. The longest individual stint consecutively was 2.5 years, albeit for something I didn't do as a punishment for that. And I can tell you, I know friends, I know myself. If you ask my wife, you ask my family, there are those times when I have incapable of being this gregarious guy I like to be, the fun-loving person I am, and I do retreat and withdraw into myself. Where there's times when I don't want to talk. When I'm so desensitized to sound now that, like, just last night, my wife was ill. She's screaming in her sleep, and I don't hear it because I spent years listening to people scream when I had to turn it out, and now you can't turn the volume on and off in there. You can't turn it on and off out here. So
Right.
I've already, I've, people might say, "Oh, you can sleep through anything," and that's good. But my wife is screaming out for help, and I can't hear her because my mind is turned off because of solitary. Um, that that may seem a small thing to most people, but I got grandkids. If they hurting and I'm not cognizant what's going on, I'm jeopardizing their life and then their ability to stay with me and enjoy their upbringing. So there are a lot of things that it has impact on. You become, there's a lot of people who internalize it differently. They feel like everybody's against them, that nobody was there for them, even when people didn't know what they were going through. There are
Mm.
people who become paranoid, people who cannot, who develop negative social interactive personal interaction behaviors. There are people who just can't interact in groups. I'm gonna tell you, although I know a lot of people went crazy during this pandemic, I was able to find my peace because I've been in this place before, where I had to quarantine, I had to be alone and find a way to deal with it. Now, did that make it better for me? No, because I watched my other people suffer around me and they couldn't understand. Now they tell me, wow, I can't imagine what you went through, because they see this. So that's it. What could be done different? 15 days is this. We didn't make the UN General Assembly. HALT didn't go to the UN General Assembly and say, listen, can we have 15 days? This is an international law. The rule on the way you treat combatants in war or anybody that you detain as a prisoner, right, is that if you hold them more than 15 days, that's considered torture. That's not our definition. That's the definition we believe, we subscribe to, and we know it's true. Listen, people go in hours after you in solitary, neurologically, your brain. The doctor can tell you that immediately. You're coming from a normal environment to a totally abnormal one, devoid of any of the comforts that you previously had. That's trauma. That's shock immediately. That's like a family member dying, losing something important to you. Immediate. You don't have no way to adjust, and there's nobody there to talk you through it. You know what I'm saying? So that's immediate trauma. So what we're saying is up to 15 days. And Department of Corrections' own rule is they have to complete their hearing of you within 14 days. If you get charged with an offense, they have a hearing and all of that set, and within 14 days, they have to make a decision to keep you locked up or release you. 15 days of the rule by the UN. All we're saying is filling with it that. Now, we recognize that some people may be a little bit more incorrigible than others, do something a little bit more dangerous or deadly than others. And for that, we need renewed and continued separation. So we're talking about separation, not isolation, number one. And we're talking about separation where you get help.
Right.
Why are they against giving you help? Isn't that what they send you to prison for to begin with? Why are they against giving you help? They still want to hold on to a barbaric, draconian, slave mentality model where you keep us discombobulated mentally, physically, and emotionally, and everything else, and then want us to act right. So the alternative is to put you in what we call a RRU, a residential rehabilitation unit. It is a unit where you get more out of cell time, but you get treatment, you get therapy, you get in-cell education study. You get to have a religious experience with a service or with a pastor or imam or whoever you down with. You get to congregate meals. You get to recognize that you lost your humanity and that retain some of it so that you can be restored to your full humanity when you get the help you need and return to popular.
And I think that's an important point of clarification. On the HALT bill, is not calling for 15 days of 22 hours or 23 hours of lock-in. It's calling for the elimination of that and to replace that, as Jerome just said, with services and out of cell time so that individuals don't lose their humanity. Dr. Grassian, can you speak to some of the effects of solitary confinement when it comes to community?
You know, one of the things that there's such a moral outrage that we feel about solitary confinement, but I've come to believe a little bit cynically that you've got to be more practical in talking to the community about what kind of effect it's going to have on them. So, keeping a person in solitary confinement costs about twice as much per day as keeping them in the general population. So we're spending a lot of money for this. We're getting people out who are not capable. We're doing everything in our power to make them incapable of functioning in broader society. We're increasing the likelihood that they'll commit crimes again, that they won't be functional, they won't be able to have productive lives. So we're spending a hell of a lot of money to increase the danger to the community. You know, when you think you're getting tough on crime, what you're actually doing is you're getting tough on the community. Because the community's still going to have to deal with these people. And if you've done everything in your power to make them out of control, psychologically impaired, incapable of functioning in a normal way, the community is going to be dealing with it.
That's right.
95% of them are going to get out and be back in the community. You know, there are other places in this world where when you lock somebody up, you try to create an environment that's as close as you can make it to living in the outside world.
Yes.
So that people can actually be rehabilitated and get back to the outside world functioning, maybe functioning better than they did before they came in.
Yeah, I went to Norway and I had an opportunity to look at Tor Holden prison, and in that prison, the living quarters, the bathroom, there's a private door for the bathroom. There's a bed. I thought it was furnished by IKEA. It looked like IKEA furniture. But the notion of it is you treat people like they matter. You separate them from the community. They weren't in the community, but you treat them like they matter because they're going back to the community.
Right.
They had a kitchen. They had knives. They had forks. They cooked their food. There was like building a community within that housing area where everybody had a responsibility to help someone else, and that carries into the community. So there are models that are out there that we could be building on. Another question was, do correction officers wear body cameras? In New York State, there is a pilot program for body cameras that's happening right now. At Fortune Society, we are looking into this. We think that is a really good practice that we ought to be lifting up and sharing, and it should be non-negotiable, where you can't turn them off, where as Jerome said, many of those institutions are places where you can't see, you won't ever see what goes on inside of those things. And like we have been educated, the general public, the national public has been educated about what happens to Black and brown people when they encounter with the police as a result of cell phone cameras. We need to be educating the public about what happens in prisons and hold those prisons and institutions accountable for what happens in them. We need to bring them out of the shadows and into the light and accountability of the community.
Yeah, I'd like to just answer,
Yeah, go ahead, Victor.
just add on just to a little bit about, about the part about community. And, I always think about, there's 7 states actually right now that have reformed solitary confinement. But what sticks out more for me out of all those particular 7 states is Colorado. And the reason why I mentioned Colorado, because I had an opportunity to go visit Colorado a few years back with a few of my colleagues to just review what they actually did with the reforms there. And speaking about how it affects the community, here is the history. 2000, I think it was 2013 or so. One of the people that were held in one of the Colorado prisons, right, and had been held in solitary confinement for a long period of time, was released.
Yeah.
Back to the community. The then commissioner, Rick Ramesh, right, took over from the previous commissioner, but the previous commissioner that had resigned from his post, right, and this particular guy found out where this warden lived at and went and killed him. Murdered that man. He found out where he lived and went to his house and murdered him. Now, mind you, this is somebody that was held in long-term solitary confinement and released directly from solitary confinement back into the community without any therapy, without any transformative service, without anything whatsoever. As a result, Rick Ramesh took over, who was the Commissioner of Corrections, right? And he actually spent some time in one of the solitary confinement units in one of the Colorado jails. As a result of his experience in there himself, what he experienced, he came out, and the next day he says, this can't continue to go on. We are going to do something about this. And they did it administratively, without legislation. They did it administratively. I went there and I visited 3 prisons in Colorado, and I talked with the participants, I talked with the guards, staff, et cetera, and overwhelmingly, I got the feedback from staff that this program, that the reforms that they did in Colorado makes their job easier, makes the prison safer, and makes the incarcerated persons better and better prepared to return back to our community. And I had an opportunity to speak to even one of the participants, because you know me, and I'm thinking like, okay, this is stage, let me go talk to one of the guys. I happen to have an opportunity to get away from the guards and everybody else, and I went to this guy's, and me and him went in the cell, sat down, and talked one-on-one, and I let him know who I was and why I was there. And I want to know, yo, dig this here, man. Is this for real? Is this really working, man? He said, let me tell you something. He said, if they would have had this program 13 years ago, I doubt if I would have still been here now. That just speaks to one of the stories that speaks to when you reform treatment of people, when you reform the way disciplinary is handled and meted out, and you treat people humanely, you treat them fairly, you treat them alternative to being placed in a cell 23 to 24 hours a day, that means it works.
Yeah.
So this is what we're looking at, and I just like to point out that with regards to
Victor.
people returning.
But we're gonna close. We're gonna close now and share next steps because we need all of you to join us in this movement to end solitary confinement. And I'll end where Victor just started on his comments. I met the wife of that slain commissioner, and I met her in a work group working on reducing and eliminating mass incarceration and the disproportionate number of people with mental illness who are incarcerated. She took the pain and hurt of her loss and turned it into advocacy and action in Colorado to help. She worked with Rick on trying to reform solitary confinement. She took that pain and decided to use it to lift up and to love and to change. And I call upon all of us to take our experiences, whether experiences of incarceration, experiences and beliefs, that we ought to be treating each other with love and dignity and respect, and lift that up and join hands to get together to end solitary confinement. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Stanley. You were a great moderator. I'd like to thank Victor, Jerome, Stuart. This was great. As people can see, there's things up on the screen. I don't know if there's anything, Victor, Jerome, you might want to add, or Stuart, Stanley, rather.
No, I just want to say, this is Jerome, that I put in the chat and the information is on there. I would advise you, if you want to do something about this, and I saw a lot of people saying they want to be involved, they want to help, go to www.nycaic.org, NewYorkCAIC.org. We got a bunch of events coming up. February 4th, we got a collaboration with the Fortune Society on February 8th. February 11th. We have some things that could come up that are coming up really shortly that you can definitely get involved in. We need everybody at the table on this. You know, this we can really take a village to change this, to end this, and we need to end it now. So join us, please.
Right.
Yes.
And we're going to send everybody all this information is going to be emailed out to anyone who participated today. So if you know.
Thank you. Thank you so
I'd
much.
like to just add one comment, something I love. David Rothenberg, our founder, always says. He says, when Fortune was created, Fortune, it was at a time where you didn't have to apologize for caring. And we need to get back to that place where we don't need to apologize for saying people who are in prison matter. We don't need to apologize to say people who are in prison don't lose their humanity. They're still our community members. They're our brothers, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles. We need to get back to that place. When 1967, David said, when he started Fortune, he didn't have to apologize for caring.
And that's a great note to end on. Thank you all very much.